This sucks. You suck. The work sucks. Working with that person sucks. Oh, you know that person you love more than anything? They suck as well. Yeah. Don't we love working with those people? Welcome to Relationships at Work, the Employee Experience and Workplace Culture Podcast. I'm Russel Lolacher, and I don't love negativity either. We all have it in us, but unfortunately sometimes we're also knee-deep and surrounded in it. Our guest today, well, she's going to help us deal with it. Whether it's coming from externally or internally, negativity at work can certainly have its impacts. So we will be digging deep. My guest today is pretty brainy on the topic. She's written a book and everything. Before we get there, I do want to mention, have you checked out our Instagram account yet? You kind of should. 3 times a week, I am posting thoughts, observations, tips to take away, different ways of thinking of things. It's been a little bit of a passion project of mine for quite a little while now, and I hope that you get a chance to check it out. If you're an Instagram nerd like myself, you will also partake too. So you can find Relationships at Work by doing a little search on the Instagram app. Yeah, do such things. And now, on with the show. Today, it's all about Kate Nasser's brain. We're going to be diving into negativity today. But first, I want to explain to you why Kate's awesome. First out of the gate, she's the founder, president of CAS Inc. and the People-Skills Coach. That's right, I put a "the" in front of People-Skills Coach. And she's been doing it for 3 decades, helping Fortune 500 leaders figure this stuff out. She's an author. Her book is called Leading Morale, The People Skills to Stop Negativity and Ignite Contributions. See the linkage there to the show we're going to talk about. She has a master's in organizational psychology and a bachelor's in mathematics. So she's using both sides of her brain. I cannot admit to the same. She runs a fantastic weekly Twitter chat called People-Skills Chat every Sunday at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Never know where people are when they're listening to this. And I always love pulling a quote I find from my guests. And this one, it hit me close to home. Morale is not touchy-feely stuff. Morale is about respecting everyone's dignity in everything you say and do. Love that. Kate, welcome so much to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Russell. I'm thrilled to be here and, of course, very excited to talk about this topic.
Oh, negativity. And I want to get out of the gates here get out of the gates right out of the gate. Yep, this is going to start really well for me. How would you define negativity in the workplace?
My definition of negativity is seeing what's wrong without also seeing what's right.
And that's coming from a place of the person that's being negative, correct?
Well, yes. I mean, the reason I came up with that definition, of course, I had to think about that, as I was trying to put all my thoughts together for the book. And there's a very interesting, I don't know, it's not a myth, but let's just call it some sort of twisted thinking today. You may have run into it. You see it, in workplaces, virtually or in the buildings. And that if you say, oh, don't be negative, they actually come back at you sometimes and say, well, there's a lot of toxic positivity now. And what they mean by that is people who were always on, like Sally Sunshine, and everything is wonderful. And it drives other people who possibly tend more toward the negative. I'm not saying that they're completely negative, but it drives them crazy. So what do? They push the negativity, but they've convinced themselves that being negative and blunt and pessimistic is the antidote to this toxic positivity. So as I'm hearing these two sides in a feudal war, futile, not feudal as in Middle Ages, I say to myself, well, wait a minute. Life is not either or. There's nothing binary about life. It's gray, it's messy, it's both. So I see the negatives in life, but I also see the positives. So to me, negativity is seeing the negative without seeing the positive.
It's funny how you sort of, and I want to dig into that too, is how the person that's not negative sees the negativity, and also how the negative person sees themselves. You've
Yep.
got it very much in a sense of their, oh, I like the word that you use, sort of an antidote, but also it's a justification that they're a truth sayer, or
Yes.
they're going to shake things up because they know what's really going on. They're just
Right.
keeping it real, as it were.
That's exactly my point. But they're claiming a space that they think that it's their space, that nobody else sees what's really going on. It's very rare that things are 100% negative. That they believe the truth is that everything is negative. Extremely rare. Think about it this way. If you still have talented people that can produce, new ideas, new products, new services, solve problems, the talent alone is positive. Even if the culture, the leadership, the attitudes may be smothering that at the moment. It's rare that it's all negative. Do you see what I mean? There's always that hope, that those options, the possibilities, those are all in the positive zone. And the people who really claim that negative space, as in, I'm the truth sayer and this all stinks. Well, you have a right to your opinion, certainly, but that doesn't mean that's the quote unquote truth.
So we talk about that truth bomb. Are there other types of negativity that people bring to work, or is it just a matter of levels of negativity, or the truth sayers? Or is there just, I just want to know if negative is negative, or are there different levels or varieties?
Oh, no, there's always different levels. There's always different levels. I mean, for example, negativity can show up in a lot of different ways. It can show up as the old no news is good news, which good luck with that one, leaders, if you think you're going to lead that way now, because the younger generations, and I admit to being older, the younger generations, they weren't raised that way. They don't think that way. They want appreciation. They want recognition. They want inspiration. They want hope. Now, I know I'm making a generalization. There could be some within the younger generations that are, forget this is all negative. But if when you're leading, you're trying to get a snapshot, of how things are progressing over your entire career as a leader.
Right.
And the generations have changed the pulse, the aura, the vibe of workplaces, whether it's virtual or in a building. Negativity can also show up as arrogance, the supremacy of logic. I'm logical, you're emotional. Well, wait a minute. I have logic, I have IQ, I have emotional intelligence. You know what I'm saying? So it could show up as chronic fault finding. The leader, the manager, or even the teammate who's always pointing out somebody's faults or somebody's mistakes, but they rarely talk about someone's talents, possibilities, skills. That's negativity.
Do you find that it tends to show up more in, say, boomers and Gen X when it comes to negativity, more so than, say, as you're pointing out, the millennials or iGen?
Very, very, very interesting question, Russell, because I don't label all of I'm a boomer, I admit to it. I think what happened is that when you look and I've talked about this even with my mom. She was born in in the mid 30s, and so she sort of was aware enough during World War II, and they called them the silent generation, right? But their whole life was about sacrifice, hard work. The idea of personal recognition and appreciation and going off and living a wow life didn't even enter a lot of their minds. So they grow up, go into the workforce, some become managers, leaders, whatever over time. Most of them that were in the workforce at that point were men, but nonetheless. And so what they brought, it wasn't as if I want to be negative. What they did was translate this hard work, sacrifice mentality into, they offered it to this, let's say the Gen X or the millennials as time went on.
Right.
But the younger generations, they hadn't lived that. So they looked at that as negative. You see what I mean? It
Sure.
wasn't as if any generation grew up negative. They grew up in harder times with the idea of, put your nose to the grindstone, be happy you have a job. Guys came home from World War II, and thankfully they had a GI Bill to help them get jobs. But, they were gone for 5 years or whatever. And suddenly some of them needed training. There was a big struggle. I think people have an idealized image of what it was like, for them to come home from World War II. And then, of course, the ones coming home from Vietnam. So there's all of this kind of mentality that when they get jobs, they might rise up to be managers or leaders, and they led with what they knew. A lot of people never had leadership or management training. So that's why the whole, here we've got the millennials saying, wait a minute, you never thank me for doing a good job. And if it was a boomer manager that had been, mentored by a post-World War II leader,
Sure,
they look at the millennial and say, what do you mean, thank you for doing a good job? You're being paid.
You're lucky to have a job.
You're lucky to have a job. You're lucky to be working here. But what they didn't understand was that that's not life now, right? I mean,
different worldviews by far, and based on
very,
experience.
very different worldviews. So now, among any generation, you can have the people who see life from the negative, from the pessimistic side. And I don't know if we'll ever find out. Is there brain chemistry involved in that? I do not know. I find it a fascinating topic, but I'm not going to make claims because I do not know.
We're talking negativity, and how you sort of touched on it. How can it show up at work, especially now that we live in a world of either working in the office or working virtually? Mm-hmm. Is there different ways in which examples of negativity can show up in either world?
It can show up as passive-aggressive behavior, trying to get even with people, trying to undermine their work. It can show up as aggressive, yelling, shouting. I mean, I remember one client, there was a major upheaval. The leader of the IT organization was, either left for whatever reason. And they brought in this guy, and he was just plain brutal, verbally brutal. He was abusive. And I wasn't there at that time. I had already done a lot of work and then, moved on to another client. But the people were calling me up and telling me, and then you wonder, okay, why was he left there for so long? Finally, they got rid of him. It can also show up as pouncing on mistakes and using it as an opportunity to, instead of giving constructive criticism, it ends up coming across as contempt. And there's a big difference between criticism of someone's, really big foul up versus contempt for who they are as a person. Fair. So there's, like you said, is negativity a light switch? Is it yes or no? No, there's a huge range of it. But I think the most important thing that I gathered when I was doing some research and, talking to my clients and everything was that there's nothing wrong with pointing out, like if, let's say there's a project, right? You're working on a project of some sort and you see that something's on the whiteboard or something's on the Zoom screen or whatever, PowerPoint, and you think that's going to cause trouble. That's going to cause a problem. That's not negativity. If what you're saying is, look, if we do that, it's going to cause this problem. But if we take this approach, it could, prevent that problem and even give us these 3 benefits. So I'm going to ask you, Russell, how did the first one, how did that sound? Did it sound negative or did it sound constructive?
Yeah, and I think it really depends on the approach and the place from where it's coming from. Right. So I love the idea that you're saying that it's constructive because I'm pointing out something and I'm trying to help you by being constructive. It's funny because most negative people will think they're being constructive.
Yeah, but they're not.
But they're not, because it's coming from a place of, as you said before, attacking or ridicule or trying to elevate themselves by putting others down.
That's it.
The first I want to talk about is the ripples that someone in the workplace can have being a negative person,
Yeah.
both short-term and long-term.
Okay.
People don't realize that that kind of activity, those kind of actions, those kinds of words can have a lot of impact on that workplace culture, especially from a personal level. So from your
Huge.
experience and your research, how can it hurt employee engagement?
Sure. So, of course, there's the whole personal, how does it hurt me as an individual? It can leave scars. It can, in some cases, force people to leave that company. In my case, back in the workforce, I worked for 3 companies before I left to start my own business. And the first one, and you can ask me the horrible things that happened there, because later, I don't want to divert from your current question. But by the time I got to my 3rd company, and the 3rd company I worked for was a very large, well-known, respected, pharmaceutical company. I was thrilled to get in there and get a job in there and so forth. But I even left that one. And the reason I left was because I could see, after this is my 3rd company, this is an excellent company, but the cultures, now this was many years ago, this was in the 80s, of course, that the cultures everywhere were just not hopeful and positive enough for me. And I don't mean it in that toxic positivity, because I'm not a, smiley girl all the time kind of person.
You're not painting it on. Got it.
Yeah. But I'm a very hopeful, forward driving, let's see what's possible. Let's see what's wrong. Let's fix it. Let's get things done kind of person. And I knew that I wasn't going to have that real, I just thought, you're never going to find this, Kate, in corporate America. Why don't you think about, starting your own business? So anyway, that's a side. So how can it ripple? So it can have personal scars. It can cause turnover, certainly. But I think, and we always think about that, right? You treat people like crap too much, they'll eventually leave. Yep. And every business person, any business owner, every business leader knows this. Some ignore it, some take it to heart and use it to change the vibe and the culture.
Well, it's funny that you point out that you worked at 3 agencies or 3 organizations and painted the larger brush of going, no, corporate America is all like this.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of the fact that that's true or not true, but that is your default because that's your experience. From a personal standpoint, it's you take it so personally that it must all be like this, that you literally got out of the 9 to 5 because you thought everywhere was going to be like this. You lost hope that there was a possibility that there was an organization that was more hopeful, more happy.
Yeah.
And that's, and I'm sure that's common. And it's sad that that's what it is.
It is sad. I also, I went to a career counselor, actually, a private one, not at the company I was working for, but a friend of mine said, because I was always like, and when this actually is pertinent to the discussion, I'd come home from work and even on the weekends, I was always complaining. I was always upset about work. So it can infiltrate your personal life. Reach out to a good career counselor. They are incredibly helpful. And sometimes you have to take your own happiness into your own hands.
Fair.
And overcome the negativity. I was not a overall negative person, but I was sounding negative. And this relates back to your how can it show up question, what ripples does it have? But back in the organization part of it, what ripples does it have? The big one that I think sometimes leaders and managers don't think of as the first thought is avoidance. Projects today there's always collaboration, right? Teamwork. I've got this piece, you've got that piece, whatever. But if someone on that project team or permanent team is always negative, or maybe always making digs at me or criticizing me, even as a teammate, no less a leader or a manager, I'm going to start avoiding that person, right? And if you're working virtually, you think, oh, that's great. Now I don't have to see that person. But what happens is if people develop a distaste for someone who's always negative, they may take longer to answer the emails. So performance results suffer big time when negativity is allowed to take over the culture.
People don't understand the levels of stress and anxiety that can be triggered from dealing with negative people all the time. And that is, as we all know, what stress and anxiety can do to the body, which can certainly make it personal and certainly carry it home with you and affect your. I know I've interacted with negative people that have really, I've sat on it. Like you get that one comment that you sit on for a week and you take it out on family members and you take it on, in your life. But also, if you're in an organization and you see that negativity happening around you and you look at, and I use air quotes around leadership here, them not doing anything about it, that silence equals acceptance. So now you've got a culture that seems to say, you know what, without us saying or doing anything, we're basically telling everybody, you know what, we're okay with this negativity. We're just fine with everybody being assholes. It's not good for you as an employee going, well, if this is the kind of place that's okay with bullies and jerks, then why do I need to work here? And that's sort of where it tips into toxicity. And that's what I want to ask you is, what is that tipping point from just negativity to pulling it almost to a toxic culture?
Oh, yeah. It's hard to pinpoint exactly one moment, of course, because it's different in different organizations. I'll tell you this much for sure. If the majority of the people in that, let's just say team, are really live on the negative side, then most likely that tipping point happens sooner, and the couple of people who really can't take it leave. So, okay, so that's a positive. They think that it's a good thing because now we just get to be who we are, the super negatives, but we don't think we're negative. We're truth tellers, right? We're realists. The problem is that, and there's something that they don't see, is that as soon as some big change comes along, right? This team needs to change what they're doing, or they need to do it in a different way, or we're going to reorg people. In other words, here comes change, right? And they always say the only thing constant in life is change.
Yep.
Well, what happens is that these teams that are happy being toxically negative and there's nobody left, everybody's left that was on the positive side. Those teams that are left and happy, when the change comes along, and they tend to be pessimists and resistant to change, they end up losing big time because big changes come frequently from the top and they don't want to hear, well, this is the way we do things. They hear that a couple of times and the next thing you know, they just disband your group and start something new. So it has ripples all the way through, even for the people who are thrilled being negative. And if there's a lot of them in the team and the positives leave and go get different jobs, etc., now we're super happy, right? Because we're all the same. But that is a recipe for someday you're going down.
We've definitely dipped our toe into the negative pool. How do we do something about this? So how do you and especially at different levels, because when you address negativity in an organization, is it different an employee versus a coworker versus a C-suite executive? Because negativity can come from anywhere in an organization. So how do you suggest people address that negativity in an organization? And certainly if you can look at it differently from different levels, I'd be really curious.
So negativity is an attitude and it's a way of speaking, right? A way of behaving, a way of talking, a way of doing things. And anytime you want to help change behavior, you have to start within the sphere that you have some influence around. So you gave a couple of examples. Let's start with a coworker who's very negative, right? Let's say you and I were working together and you are, positive, more balanced, and maybe I'm the super negative one. What can you do as we have to work together on things to bring some balance to our interactions. First and foremost is to say, I say to me, for example, you're the positive one, I'm the super negative one, right? You would say to me, I hear what you're saying. You think that in this case that this will never work. I hear you. I, however, also see a couple of possibilities here. And you tell them what the possibilities are. And then say to them, what if we were to try this idea as we try to work through this project? What if we were to just at least try one of these ideas? Is it possible? Well, I don't think it will work. Yeah, I know. I heard what you're saying, but why not try it? And I will take this is the key. And I will even take the responsibility. If this doesn't work and the manager comes around or whatever, I will stick my hand up in the air and I will say, I own this one. It was my idea. Some negative people that are always in the negative, this can't work, nothing will ever work, actually have a fear of being blamed when things fail. So negativity is their security blanket. It's their safety zone. Because if you say nothing's ever going to work, you've already declared that, then nobody can blame you when it fails, right?
Does that approach happen at different levels in an organization? Can you do that with an executive?
Well, it depends. It depends on, we're talking about hierarchical organizations. There's a lot of companies now that are organized very differently. But I'm still talking about, the companies that have hierarchy. You've got your executives, your director level leadership, and down the line. So it's rare that an employee would have a chance to say that to a C-suite executive. You might not ever see a C-suite executive, staff level person. But what I can say is this: in the end, executives love results. So even if in the way they act, because they were mentored by some curmudgeon, who doesn't say anything positive, but if you can produce results, they'll take notice. So if you, as a staff member person, want to eventually influence a C-suite executive, then you have to work up the hierarchy. So you would have to show your manager or leader your balanced, positive, can-do, get-it-done attitude. Because you are showing them, yes, I see the challenges. I see that we have 3 days to do something that should actually take 2 weeks. But what if we were to slice it into pieces, pick the most important thing that needs to be done, and see what we can do to facilitate and speed up getting there? In other words, when you speak in a balanced approach, the negative people will still sound negative. They'll still be spewing out, no. But if it's like the little engine that could. If you keep going forward, step by step by step, and you have the resilience to do that in the face of all of this, I always picture toxic negativity as like a giant haze, like some kind of smog or in a traffic jam. And you have to be able to keep breathing while all that toxic dust is flying around you. But produce results with positive speech, with positive actions. And if enough people do it, if you have teammates that can also be that way and do that, it can actually become the culture. But in that moment, you've got to realize you're trying to create this new culture from the bottom up. So don't expect a lot of, handshakes and appreciation and recognition at that point. Your appreciation and recognition, you would have to share among yourselves. Look what we're doing. Look what we're achieving. And hopefully your immediate manager, supervisor, leader, team leader, whatever, will be that way too. You see what I'm saying? But you have to be strong enough to want to do that. I've done it. I've worked in organizations, even as a consultant, where I had to start from the bottom and show people, look, I know as a customer service department, you feel beaten down. And I found out one day because I watched the manager come out of the back office in a giant team meeting. She called everybody together. And instead of saying, look, I know we're having tough times, but we're doing some good things. Let's talk about both. She came out and said, I know you keep saying we need more people. We don't need more people. We need you to work harder.
Oy.
And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. Game over. I just found the real problem.
No kidding. And it's funny you brought up revolving door as well. I find it interesting that some leadership, again, the air quotes, where there will be a revolving door and they'll be just like, oh, you know what? We're training people to go somewhere else. When you're like, are you looking at why they're all leaving? Leadership's really good at coming up with excuses for obvious problems and trying to put a positive PR spin on it, going, oh no, we're the launching pad for other careers. No, they're running away from you.
I'm sorry. I know. I love the way you said that.
No, that's not this world that you live in, but your fantasy rose-colored Sesame Street glasses are lovely to look at. Give me a break.
Russell, the funniest part is when you said a training place for future companies or whatever. I'm not going to say the name of the company.
Of course.
But we all said, when people say where'd you go to school, I tell them, well, I went to such and such college. And then I went to, and then we all said the name of the company and put the word college after it because it was such a revolving door. This place was like a college for all these other companies who were hiring us in droves because technically we were very good, but we couldn't stay working there.
You're learning what not to do and what kind of work environments you don't want to be in. That's what you're learning.
Exactly.
What shouldn't you do around negative people? There's certainly, you've shared your approach about how taking responsibility and sort of nurturing people into a positive direction.
Right.
But what are a couple of things you shouldn't do around negative people?
Don't play their record. In other words, I wouldn't say to a negative person, well, let's try it. What's the worst that could happen? Because if you say, what's the worst that could happen to a negative person, I mean, you might as well, you're going to be there for a while listening.
Fair comment.
To what they say. Certainly, I don't find that attacking back works. Now, if someone is being verbally abusive, because again, remember you had said to me early on in this discussion, is negativity one thing? And no, I mean, it's a whole host of things. The only thing that I never, ever suffer, never tolerate is pure, true verbal abuse. I don't ever tolerate that. And in those cases, I just say to them, if it's a teammate and they're verbally abusing me, I'll just simply say to them, look, I show you basic respect. I expect the same in return.
Just don't feed the beast.
And then I'm quiet and give them time to, and they may fluster. And, people, when they hear this kind of feedback, they, expect a little bit more ruffle coming out of their mouths. But if you hold your ground, in the end, they realize, oh, she's not to be trifled with. That's not something she's going to tolerate. And they come back around later. Sometimes they'll say, sorry about that. I shouldn't have used that word, blah, blah, blah. But I think overall with negative people is also don't judge them. I mean, of course, today you and I, as we're having this discussion, it sounds like we're judging, but actually we're trying to dig in and explore, what this is all about. Negative people are no worse or better than I am or you are or anything. They have simply a different way. And people have differences. So I never judge negative people. The one that is the toughest for me outside the verbal abuse thing are people who are always what we call sad sacks. You know what I mean? They're always complaining. Nothing's ever good. They go on and on. And, I get to the point where I feel like I'm trying to push a truck up a hill without a motor. I mean, it's just too much. But instead of lashing out at them, you can just say to them, I need a break right now. And I also have 4 or 5 things to do. Can we continue this conversation later? It doesn't mean that later they're going to be more positive. Sometimes they are. but take a break if you can't handle it. Don't say to them, look, you sad sack, all you ever do is complain and bring people down and I can't stand you. Because now what you're doing is where they live. Do you see what I mean? Don't become them.
And that leads me back to the first point that we had around compassion.
Right.
Because you don't know what kind of day they've had. You do not know what their life is like at home. Even though they're coming to work and kind of poisoning the workplace well, there's also a level of compassion where you kind of have to understand you don't know their world. You don't know where they're coming from generally. And
exactly.
And relationships at work, the name of the podcast, is not only the relationships we have with others, but also about relationships we have with ourselves. So
amen to that.
And so the last question I want to ask you before we get into the two questions I ask every guest is, how can we identify in ourselves that we're being negative and sort of address that? Is there any advice you'd have for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I get up in the morning and I say to myself, how am I feeling today? And I really stop for a minute and think about it. And I'm not talking, just physically, but, attitude wise. And I asked myself that for a bunch of days in a row. This was when I was so unhappy, in my work before I started my own business. And I realized that every single day I woke up, I was already in a bad mood. It's not hard to identify if you do a little bit of reflection. Also, if you have a trusted friend or family member, and I say trusted because you trust them to give you honest, objective vision of what they see in you, right? Without being blunt or like, well, you're always negative. That's not what I need. If I'm going through some reflection, trying to assess, am I negative more than positive? I need someone to say, well, lately, I see more negativity in you, but I know there's positive in there because I know you. In other words, a trusted person can give you balance. I had one of my sisters say to me, you've changed. I said, what do you mean? Well, you're just not you anymore. My God. But she didn't say it in a demeaning way. Do you see what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
It came from a place of, wow, because they knew me as really well, really, really well. The friend was almost like a family member. So find a friend, a family member that you trust that can, and say to them, I'm going to want some feedback and I want it to be objective over the next week or two, if it's somebody that you're, around a lot, right? And just have them give you some feedback. It's incredibly valuable. I mean, the time she said, you're so upset all the time. Why don't you, go talk to this career counselor? It changed my life.
I remember I was working, back east, and I was in the job was fine, but nothing was like, I wasn't feeling like I had a support system, and I know it was affecting me. I was becoming a negative person based on my career wasn't what I wanted to be. The job was okay, but it wasn't really what I wanted. And I felt it, but I wouldn't admit it to myself just because my self-awareness muscle certainly wasn't what it is now. And I had an opportunity to go MC a wedding. So I saw my mom for the first time after 5 months. And almost the first things out of her mouth were, "Are you okay?
Mm-hmm. Moms are great.
There's something off. You're not the same."
Mm-hmm.
And it just that sledgehammer to the heart, to the face, to the, was just sort of like somebody seeing me and really seeing me that I trusted, and I would welcome her feedback. That's another thing. It's good to have people to have feedback, but you have to be open to receiving it too. I think that's a perfect spot to leave negativity behind, Kate Nasser. I have a couple questions that I like to ask my guests. First question is, what's your best or worst? It could be either or.
Mhm.
employee experience that you've had and the effects it had on you.
Well, I actually have, it was my very first company. Again, I don't say the name.
Nope. I'm guessing you're
And
going with worst then, based on what you've said before.
yeah, it's the when I was first there, and when you first got hired into this place, because they had a lot of proprietary systems you had to learn, you were labeled a trainee. And even though you were, getting paid, and working and working and working. And one day, my direct manager, and we were back then, we didn't have our own terminal computers on our desks. We had a centralized bank of terminals in the center of the big place. And I was there working, and he walks right up to me in front of everybody, starts screaming and yelling at me, and he says, "You're just working to get things done." And he's screaming at me in this very negative voice. And in my mind, I'm thinking, isn't everybody working to get things done? I mean, what I wanted to say to them, what the hell are you talking about? But I was very upset. And in the early days, women were never allowed to even show a tear at work, because you'd be labeled as ineffective. And that was like a death sentence to your career. So he's screaming and yelling at me, and I feel the tears welling up. So I kept the tears behind me, and I finally just looked at him and I said, "What is it that you want me to do differently? What is it that I'm doing that you want me to stop? And what is it that you want me to do?" But it had a terrible, this was in the first couple of months of working there. And I thought, this is not going to end well. And the second one was maybe a year later. I was still there. And I went upstairs to talk to one of our clients, because we were the techie department and we had to do systems for the business people there. And this guy started to sexually harass me. And I'm thinking, I told you. Why didn't you listen to yourself? I told you this wasn't going to end well. But I came downstairs, and I had a different boss by then. And I went in and told my boss, and he poo-pooed it. Oh, well, he didn't mean anything by it. And I looked at my boss, and he was sitting behind this big, big wooden desk. I'm on the other side of it. And I took my fists and I banged my fists on his desk. And I said to him, "You address it, or I'm going to sue him, you, and this company." And he went and talked with the guy. And the guy actually came and apologized to me. But between this negativity in terms of leaders and managers who would just come up and humiliate you and scream at you in front of everybody, the sexual harassment, the passive aggression. This place, I can't use the word I want to use, but use your imagination to come up with a word for this place.
Shitty.
Yeah. And what
I'll use it.
The effect that it had on, well, I was going to think of something else, but I think she covers it at this point.
So what is one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work? It could be about negativity. It doesn't have to be, though.
Assume the positive about somebody when you begin to interact with them, and trust your mind and your intuition to signal you if they don't deserve that initial trust.
I love
that you will be able to handle it. A lot of people start out assuming the negative so that they feel prepared that they won't get run over, they won't be used by someone else. The problem is that it really, really limits relationships, even in your personal life, but we're talking, of course, about work. So if you assume the positive, give them that initial trust, and then your listening skills, your bank of intuition, and my book, Intuition, is just experience reapplied in a new situation. So, trust your gut. I will tell you this, and you're only going to know it if you try it, but it has changed my life. I assume the positive at the beginning because I trust myself to be able to handle someone who has a nefarious intent, who really their goal is to put me down to make themselves feel better. Well, if and when they start that, I will address it. it changes your life if you assume the positive and then just trust yourself to see, oh, okay, that person, not everybody, but that person did not deserve my initial positive trust.
And that's the thing with relationships at work, Kate, is that those people skills that you use at work to build those strong relationships are just as applicable to your home life, to customers, to everything. Relationships are relationships. So, Kate, thank you for spending your time with us today. I learned a lot. There's a bit of self-reflection I have to do, I think, based on some of your feedback and how I think myself can approach. And I hope our listeners as well will have just sort of take a look in the mirror a little bit, maybe, even if it's a little bit, maybe it's a tweak here or there. Because we all have bad days, but it's that relationship we have with ourselves as well. Thanks so much for your time, Kate.
Thank you. And have a great week. And maybe we can do this again sometime on another topic.
Love to. If you want to hear more of the brainy stuff that comes out of Kate's mind, you should go to her Twitter account at Kate Nasser. Nasser spelled Nasser, and also her website, katenasser.com.